discovered my mic is on. Good morning. It's good to be with you. I hope you're enjoying the really fascinating discussions and presentations so far this morning. Thank you so much for joining us for this track. I'm Rebecca Finley. I'm the CEO of the Partnership on AI, and it is my pleasure to be chairing this track throughout the day. This is Talent Lab, the future of work, recruitment, and human potential in AI. If that doesn't sound familiar to you, you might be in the wrong room, but please stay. We're very, very happy to have you with us. This is really about engaging all of you and our speakers today in a conversation about how we, in the AI community, solve these dual challenges that we're facing: a global talent shortage on one side, the Great Resignation on another. And I'm told to ask you to please do not forget to rate the speakers after their session on the app. So today's first conversation with this amazing panel is focused on the Great Resignation and tech's talent drought, reimagining how and why we work. So just out of interest, how many people in this room have resigned or changed jobs during or after COVID? Wow. Okay. I did not expect that many. Another question. How many of you resigned from a job without knowing exactly where you would be going next? Wow, even more. Okay. How many of you in this room are still considering where you will go next? Oh my gosh. All right. I suspect you are going to be very popular over the next few days. So everybody look around, see who those are with their hands raised. So as you probably know, the whole notion of the Great Resignation is generally ascribed to UCL professor Anthony Klotz. He was the one who coined the term the Great Resignation, and it is this economic trend in which employees have voluntarily resigned from their jobs en masse, and it began in the early 2021s and has now continued on through COVID, and potentially we could say post-COVID. We're not quite there yet, but maybe. There's been many reasons cited for this, but there's also been many names. It's also been called the Big Quit, or the Great Reshuffle, or some people have coined it the Great She-signation because of the loss of many female workers across the labor force. We also now have these new terms, well, they're new to me: quiet quitting, quiet firing, which has resulted, I think, in the best new expression, which is acting your wage, if any of you have heard of that. Gallup estimates that 50% of the U.S. workforce are quiet quitting, and that this number is even higher under young workers. So here's my request. If you have a favorite name or title for this particular period or time that we're going through, let me know. I'll share it as the afternoon panels proceed. But all of this really speaks to the disruption in the wider labor market that is impacting in unique ways the AI and technology sector. We've just, for example, seen hiring freezes announced at some of the large tech companies, and even some firms announcing layoffs. So needless to say, this track and this morning's panel have much to unpack, discuss, and yes, indeed, reimagine. So we're going to dive right into these topics to get started. We have 6 speakers, including myself, who will each share a brief solo presentation with you, and then we're going to have a bit of a group conversation, open it up for your questions as well. All of our speakers are on stage. I think we have one more who is going to be joining us virtually, but we'll see. And so let's get started right away with Lauren Razavi. Lauren is the author of Global Natives: The New Frontiers of Work, Travel, and Innovation. Over to you, Lauren.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. So I'd like to begin my talk today by taking you back to the spring of 2015, when I was working as a foreign reporter for the Guardian newspaper. My editor asked me to travel to Bali and cover a business story about a new movement of so-called digital nomads, people who work and travel at the same time. I remember arriving at my hotel, being shown to my room, and the staff taking my breakfast order: banana pancakes, fresh mango juice, and locally roasted coffee. And as I laid in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling fan and wondering what the next day of reporting might bring, I thought, I just can't believe this place costs $30 US a night. Back in London, where the Guardian's HQ is, you'd be lucky to get a couple of sad-looking eggs and a bad coffee in a little paper cup for that kind of price, let alone a room for the night. And it's precisely this kind of practical calculation, what a London salary gets you in an exotic destination like Bali, that drove the first wave of digital nomads to take off and try out life elsewhere. Today, that desire for flexibility and adventure in how we live and work is a huge part of what's driving the Great Resignation and the global shortage of tech talent. 7 years ago, living as a digital nomad made me an outlier, but my way of life is fast-going mainstream now thanks to the rise of remote work. These days, my work is a little different. I'm a director at an all-remote company called Safety Wing. And over the summer, my colleagues and I surveyed 4,000 remote workers worldwide. And one of our key findings was pretty simple. Remote work works. 64% of remote workers increased their productivity after switching from office-based to remote work. And 56% also say that their skill set expanded. Those numbers speak for themselves. Remote work is definitely here to stay. And digital nomads are the next era in the future of work as it emerges. To give some context to that statement, I want to talk to you about the global battle for talent that we find ourselves living through. The relationship between employees and companies is changing, but so is the relationship between citizens and nation states. Let's consider 3 emerging signals. Number 1, nomad visas, easier routes to residency in other countries. Tax breaks, cash rewards for choosing to base your job in a given jurisdiction. And 3, talent incentives, paying remote workers to move to a city, region, or country. All 3 of these policy ideas are already in progress around the world, across North America, Latin America, Europe, and Asia. And the early results have been promising. Long-forgotten areas have been revitalized, new businesses and markets are opening up, and underdog destinations are appearing on the global stage. Today, the world is locked in an outright battle for knowledge economy talent. And the battle is not just between companies anymore, it's between countries too. From drinking and dining with remote workers around the world, and from the aforementioned survey of 4,000 people, I can tell you that remote workers value 3 things above all else when it comes to our work: flexibility, independence, and work-life balance. The days of a startup office with beanbags and a foosball table are behind us. That's not how companies can compete anymore. The companies need to go further than simply allowing people to do remote work if they're going to meet their employees' expectations. After all, the cost of poor retention is painfully high. Our research shows it will cost you between 6 and 24 months of a person's salary to replace them. To keep workers happy, companies need to design systems that better facilitate flexible, independent, and human-centered work. But the most ambitious companies, those aiming to attract and retain the world's very best talent, need to go a step further than that. They need to look at digital nomads as a signal for the future and start planning for that future. This is where my work at Safety Wing is relevant to the conversation. Our company mission is to build a global social safety net that allows remote workers to live and work anywhere as digital nomads. We provide health insurance, retirement, and income protection products delivered as a global subscription, a borderless portable version of the citizenship services that people traditionally access through a nation state. More and more of our customers now are businesses that choose to provide borderless health insurance to their global workforce, whether they employ 5 people or 500. And this is fueled by influential companies like Spotify, Airbnb, and Google, which have established work from anywhere policies that permit their staff to spend 1 to 3 months each year remote working from overseas. Remote workers now want the opportunity to experience life as digital nomads. And they expect their companies to support and facilitate this through work from anywhere policies and by offering new types of employee benefits. To stay ahead of the curve and win the best talent, business leaders have to pay attention to these expectations and respond to them. Remote work has unlocked new opportunities and new ways of thinking about both work and life. Those shifts are going to have consequences for generations to come. The key to leveraging them in business is to become a long-termist in your thinking, to be guided by the principle that the future of 100 years from today begins with the actions we take in the present. So I'd like to leave you with a few key takeaways to guide your approach to talent in the era of digital nomads. First of all, take the long view. The changes you make in a business now will have an impact on what's possible for your team for many years to come. Secondly, watch the future signals. If we look closely, we can already see the direction that work is heading, and we should act on it now rather than take a wait-and-see approach. And thirdly, invest in your people. Talent matters more than anything for business success. So how will you make sure your company stands out from the crowd? Thank you very much for listening to me, and please do come and find me after the session to continue the conversation.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Fascinating. I think we may hear some of those future signals from our next speaker, Marian Marcus, who is the Managing Data Scientist at Capgemini. Marian, over to you.
Hey all. Think I get to push the button? Oh yeah, it works. I'm going to skip the introduction about who I am because I got 10 minutes. And I'm going to just go straight to the important question here, as a social scientist. Have you ever been dumped? Hands up. Who has ever been dumped? Okay, so you know the feeling that you ask yourself, why did they dump me? Am I not good enough? That's the question that many organizations are asking themselves right now as they see their employees leave. And I remember back then, this was one of the most important points in my life, of course, that my friends patted me on the shoulder and said, man, they're not leaving you because of you. They're just going to someone better. And this is the real answer that many organizations deny when they go like, what did I do wrong? But it's not about you. So that was the first of three main points I want to make here that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about the Great Resignation. Second one is that I, as a data scientist, look at the Great Resignation and go like, well, actually, you could have seen it coming. How so? Well, because 8 years ago I was studying these models, and you can predict a fair lot of the attrition, or for example, burnouts you get in your HR system based on standardized HR data. I can't show you the actual models of that because I would get an NDA on my head, but I can show you a demo we built for a hackathon a few years ago. The example given here is that we built a model that can score individual employees on whether or not they're going to leave. So here is an example. Imagine, I know God forbid, imagine you work in HR, and every dot here is an employee of yours. On the horizontal axis is the propensity for them to leave, and the vertical is how much is this individual worth to your company. And we see that the majority of the dots of the employees are fairly okay, they're going to stay. But on the right we have John, a scrambled name of course. John is a problem case because he's likely to leave. I, as an HR manager, assume I have this model, it's an XGBoost model. I can predict who's going to leave. Does this help me? Exactly, because I'd be biased and discriminating if I go to John and talk, why are you leaving? Because the AI said so. That don't work. So then we start screaming about, oh, but we need explainable AI, which is really just statistics and machine learning again. Luckily, we built such a model because on the second tab you can click on the left. You get a readout for every individual why they are leaving, why they are scored at high risk. And in the case of John, it's not his overtime, that's in the green, but it's his educational field, low environmental satisfaction, and his job level. So don't talk to John about burnouts. Traditional HR would start talking to everyone about burnouts because they heard there's a lot of them. But if we look at Robin, who has a completely different profile, gets a different reading. And like any good analytical model, the outcome of the model is not a judgment or a fact in itself, but merely an input for a conversation. And you can scramble it across the map. We build a map to show which part of Germany is doing good or bad. The important point here is that the biggest predictors, according to scientific papers, some of the three are age, marriage, and time in service. Okay, marriage, people who are married are less likely to leave. It's that simple. But you're not going to tell people to get married, right, as a company? Or give a bonus or something. Actually, I think some companies would try that. But the major other predictors, like, oh damn, the icons got scrambled up. So their grade, their responsibility, their level in the organization, who's their manager, those are all factors you can influence, and those are the biggest predictors we have in and outside of science to predict who's going to leave or get a burnout. Specifically, in one of the projects I did, it was managers, because 4 managers were causing the majority of people leaving. So I, as a young data scientist, I was so proud. I went up to management and said, these are your biggest predictors. And management was it. Those 4 were in the front row. You can imagine what happened next. I got shot down. My AI was called flawed and evil and bad. But I would like to point out here, if you look very carefully, what do you not see on this picture? That's right, ping pong tables and pizza. And I think we can add remote work to this, because that is a standard thing nowadays, not a specialty. I'm sorry, HR. Plus the pizza is usually quite disgusting. The most important here is that I now get a lot of questions from a lot of data privacy officers, a lot of ethics people, a lot of management that really doesn't want to listen because they already knew it was the manager, but now they have a separate extra reason to. The important thing here is that we now ask ourselves, are we allowed to do this? But, as mentioned before, these models are from 8 years ago, and I studied them, and they've been ran for 20 years, I believe. Once it becomes accepted fact and norm that we can indeed predict such behavior, because humans, if you judge individuals, you are a racist. If you judge groups of people, you are data scientists. If we accept that these models can be used to predict attrition and also to prevent it, because you can have a talk with them like, you haven't had a raise or a promotion in 3 years, of course you're going to leave, damn it. Once we accept that this works, and we're far off, we will ask the question, are we allowed not to? Like you're in court, the guy has a burnout. Judge asks you, why organization didn't you run standard models on this stuff? You are a data-driven HR department, are you not? At some point, and we will see this point in our lives, we will start using these models preventatively, but we're still far away from that. And right now, the data privacy officer just starts sweating like crazy when I visit, saying, I want all the gender data you have, and all the ethnicity data you have, and preferentially also who's gay. Because otherwise I can't check if my model is biased, which is really the big issue right now since we entered privacy everywhere. Now lastly, my third point concerns cows. I know we're talking about people here, not cattle, it's not the same. You're also not Russian cows, but Russian cows is the point I want to make. Bear with me. So, Larionov, who here knows Alexei Larionov? He was in charge of I'm pronouncing this wrong, sorry, the Ryazan province in 1959 in Soviet Russia. And he had a KPI to triple the beef production in that province in 3 years. Larionov said, I can do it in 1. I can triple the beef production in 1 year. That was his KPI. He told the executives in Moscow. So what did he do? Well, first of all, he slaughtered all the beef cows in the entire province. Then he started borrowing the milk cows and also slaughtered them. Then he started importing cows from neighboring provinces and also slaughtered those. And tripled the beef production in 1 year. And he got the KPI, he got a hefty promotion, and he was awarded the title Hero of the People and he moved to Moscow. Any idea what happened the next year? Hell yeah. Because 65% of all the cows were suddenly gone. So the next year the whole system crashed because somebody pursued short-term KPIs. And that brings me to the problem of KPIs. The problem of KPIs is that they work at the cost of everything not included in the KPI. And here lies the third and perhaps most important part of the Great Resignation, and then I'm done spitting in your faces, is that the pursuit of short-term gain and instead of long-term growth, that is the real cause here. This is why people leave. Because all the badges and the ideas I just gave you about things you can change, promotional structures, pay raises, the reasons why people leave, why they leave you is because you have KPIs as organizations on every one of those things, so you can't change it for the individual. So then they just leave and go find someone better. So this is based, Sun Tzu figured this out in 5th century BC. This is a real quote, of course. And yeah, this is at the very core, because we do so many interventions to keep people. Organizations come up with the wildest ping pong pizza ideas. But the whole core point is that if those interventions don't hurt the core KPI in the short term, the bottom line, then they're not going to do much of anything, because the Great Resignation is merely a symptom of this problem. Or you could do absolutely nothing, but ever since this year, especially this year, we found out that sometimes doing nothing is the most violent thing to do.
All right, enough said. Ryan, thank you so much. I'm now going to turn it over to Sharon O'Day, the founder of Lithos Partners, who's going to provide remarks.
He?
So I can talk a lot more about this, but this is a demo. Please,
So, hello, I'm Sharon O'Day, and I'm a consultant on the digital workplace and the future of work. But like Marianne, I will keep my introduction short. I'm going to talk today briefly about the context in which the Great Resignation is happening. So technology is both shaped and is shaped by all the other forces of change that we see at the moment. I'm going to briefly introduce those forces. And I will actually get my slides up on the screen. That's someone else's. Hey! I've got the wrong set of slides. I can live without the slides. Doesn't matter that one. No? All right then. So, where was I? So technology both shaped and is shaped by all the other forces of change that we have at work around us. And I'm going to explain today that while technology is one of the drivers of change, it is also a critical way that we are going to adapt to all the other forces of change, and so that we can all thrive in this new world of work. Have I got these slides yet? No? Okay, I'll live without them. Sorry. So the future, the present of work is complicated, and it's getting more complicated all the time. So let's start by having a look at some of that complexity to begin with. The first is that of place. So most of us work for organisations that are spread across a number of sites, perhaps across a number of different countries. Thank you. Here we go. And we're not simply talking about offices here. Remember that something like 80% of workers are in frontline roles. So we're talking about office and home, but we're also talking about production lines, schools, hospitals, shops, working face-to-face with customers on oil rigs, on aeroplanes. Even if we're looking just at the dimension of place alone, things are pretty complicated when we look at work. The other degree of complexity that we begin with really is time. So organisations are spread across different time zones, but also as more of us are working from home, we're starting to spread our work across the day to fit it around the other things that we're doing. And of course we can add to that what Laura was talking about, the rise of nomad working, which disconnects people and teams from a shared standard working day. So work is becoming distributed across place and time in ways that it wasn't in the past. And that's a shift that's been accelerated by COVID, but it's been happening for a really long time. But those two are by far from the only ways that work is shifting. So let's look at some of the others briefly.
but just as a summary.
My slide's been going on. So let's also look at demographics. The workforce is changing. It's becoming more diverse. It's becoming older. It's better educated on average. We've got 3 generations in the workforce, and we're about to have 4 as our working lives get longer. There's also a change to how we think about employment status. The relationship between people and their work is changing too. More of us are working part-time, perhaps on a short-term contract. We might work for more than one employer at a time. Depending on the industry that you work in, you might find that you're not legally categorised as an employee, but rather as self-employed. Or whole areas of work for organisations are performed by third-party providers. Kind of related to this is the decline of careers. So relationships between people and organisations are becoming less defined by loyalty and much more transactional in how we think about them. People move in and out of organisations much more regularly than they would have done in the past. Now that creates new demands to on and off-board people, but also to ensure that knowledge and intellectual capital is captured while people are there so it can be reused by others who follow. And as we shift through careers or cycle through different jobs, we constantly need to reskill to keep pace with change. And that means we need to give people opportunities to learn, to access training when they need it. And also, as people cycle in and out of jobs a lot more quickly, we need to make sure that people can hit the ground running as quickly as possible so that they can be productive almost right away. And then, of course, the final one, which we'll focus on here, is about technology. Now, technology continues to change the way that we work. Now, all those headlines about robots taking our jobs are probably still a bit premature, but in almost every industry, automation is making an impact, and human labour can be augmented or enhanced by artificial intelligence for those tasks that computers are simply better at than us. So we're looking at a hybrid now of human and non-human work too. Now, looking at all of that, frankly, work today is messy, and the future of work is messier still. It's getting messier all the time. Work is becoming disconnected from place, from time, from organisations, from contracts, from employment, and to a degree from human labour. So, work is increasingly distributed across place and time, across different ways of working, across different relationships between people and organisations. And as society and work changes, we have that opportunity to radically rethink how work gets done, how we balance life and work, perhaps to work more sustainably, and perhaps even to rethink the nature of work itself. We've got an opportunity to make work better for people, for organisations, for communities, even for the planet by making it more sustainable. But for that future of work to work and to deliver on the promise, the ambitions that we have for all of it, it needs to work for all kinds of workers. Office workers, home workers, frontline workers, people who do a little bit of each, full-time, part-time, diverse workforce, that multi-generational workforce that I talked about. A workforce of people that might not necessarily directly work for your company, and particularly one that works with or is augmented by technology, increasingly so. Workers of all kinds are reliant on technology to communicate, to collaborate, to measure, to plan, to transact, to get things done. And technology is supposed to help, but if we're honest, if you think about the work and the tools that you might use at work, a lot of the time it doesn't, and in fact, a lot of the time, it simply makes matters worse. Let's look at why that is. For me, I feel like there's often a bunch of reasons why technology doesn't support people effectively at work. One of them, there's simply too much of it. So it's often a frustrated, fragmented mix of tools that don't play nicely together and all work in different ways. People have to use multiple tools at work to get even simple things done. They've all got different designs, different interfaces, and people have to switch endlessly between them. Each of those switches has what's called a cognitive cost. That's a little frisson of irritation, and they all add up to making us annoyed and unproductive as we get our work done. And the other problem we have is that the technology we have at work often isn't designed for the reality, that complex reality of how we work today. So tools, for example, are designed largely for one person working for one employer at a time, perhaps for an extended period. But as we talked about before, increasingly a number of us just simply don't work that way. We contract, we freelance, we do 2 jobs. Our tools just haven't caught up with our need to onboard and offboard in that kind of way, or wear multiple hats. All too often, we expect people to learn to adapt to the technology we provide, rather than making the technology adapt to the reality of how people work.
Programmers that the model didn't see before.
Yep. All of this makes our increasingly complex world of work even more complex, and that's especially difficult for frontline workers, older workers, people with low digital confidence and so on. And all of this is especially problematic now as we face this shift in how we work, because digital isn't something we use at work, but it is where and how we work. We're more reliant on tech than ever before to get work done, but tech is often part of the problem because it's not selected, configured, designed with real people and their real jobs and the emerging reality of work in mind. And at the same time, our expectations for our workplace technology continue to grow because they're driven by our experiences of what we use in our daily lives outside of work. And ultimately, all of this is making the talent shortage, the Great Resignation, worse. Because ultimately, all of us just want to do a good job. We want to do that job as easy as possible, with as few barriers as possible, as quickly as possible. And technology should enable that, but often it doesn't. If people feel like they can't get their work done, or be as productive as they'd like to be, or they waste too much time getting basic stuff done at the expense of things they find more rewarding, then they will walk. So to deliver on this promise of making work better, we need to put humans back at the centre of our thinking as we plan for the future, as we plan even for the present reality of work. So already a growing proportion of labour is done by non-humans. And as I said, that's not robots taking our jobs, but taking on those tasks that computers simply do better than us. Pattern spotting, repetitive work, using AI and automation so that we can get on with the things that we're better at, the human side of work. All of that means that in the future of work, we're not just talking about a hybrid of place and time, but a hybrid of human and non-human labour. So the World Economic Forum predicted that sometime around 2024, 2025, which really isn't that far away, we'll see the inflection point where more work, more labour globally is done by machines than by humans. So as we make that shift, we need to think carefully about how we help people to work more effectively and confidently with or augmented by that non-human labour. So what can we all do to help? How can we enable people to work in this human-machine hybrid? How can we make the experience of working augmented by and working with technology a pleasant and a productive one so that people feel that their work is purposeful and rewarding? So going back to those 6 forces at the beginning, I put tech here back at the centre because it both drives the change but also allows us to adapt to it, to thrive within it. All of these forces are combining to make the world of work more complex, more contingent, more distributed. There's a faster pace of change. There's a shift in balance from organisations to individuals. So if we're to deliver on that promise of productivity, technology has to help people to manage to navigate that complexity. It needs to be designed and implemented for the reality of how, that messy reality of how people work today, focused on enabling individuals to thrive in this messy world of work. By streamlining, simplifying, automating, applying the power of cognition, we can make work better. If we outsource those tasks that computers do better than us, we can make the experience of doing our work a good one, and we give people the space, the time to do things they're better at. Ultimately, that is the more rewarding and human side of work, and the things that will make us stay and thrive in the jobs we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. That was great. Now we're going to move on to Hayo van Bema, the founder of Adelax.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Hayo. I'm based here in Amsterdam and represent an executive search, a recruitment firm, basically focusing on the tech industry in the Netherlands. And I'm here together with my colleague Sylvia. And the main reason why I wanted to share some thoughts with you today is, well, because of some basic statistics and what Marijn already told us, this big resignation, this talent drought that sort of resulted after that, we could have predicted that. We were part of that. Who of you from a professional perspective has been hiring people in their teams for the past couple of years or even decades? A lot of you. I mean, and who of you think that recruitment processes, executive search processes have really become innovative, have changed, have been improved over the years? I don't see that many hands, but maybe I didn't ask the question right, but on the other hand, I see the same. I've had a small tech company before I started my recruitment firm. And one thing I learned is that every recruitment process, although you talk to recruiters, you talk to headhunters, they will all say they have their individual way of working. They will say we have a huge database of candidates, we can instantly provide you with a great short or long list with potential candidates. Sure, that's a great selling point, but every process is like the goldfish going around its bowl. Once again, you write a job description, you ask for budget, you have somebody from HR teaming up with you, and there again we start. We start the search process. The candidates in your own network are not good enough, you start looking outside of your network, and the recruiters, and that's the main reason I also wanted to share that today with you, are sometimes also people like me, white, male, certain age. The reason why this big resignation started, and it wasn't because of COVID, according to a very nicely written Harvard Business Review article, but COVID accelerated it, it's because we've been hiring people in the wrong way. We've been all doing that, not just me, you've been part of that as well. And it was because we were hiring people for type of education they had, the number of years they been in a certain role. All these hard skills that we can easily get out of LinkedIn and then process in the way we recruit and we select people. This has all been done with a huge bias, including myself. I mean, I was born and raised here in the Netherlands, but my sister wasn't. She was born in South Korea. So she had a totally different way of looking at the job market than I had, which I never understood, because we're brother and sister. But because she's Asian, she's got a totally different experience. And that also really triggered a lot in my perspective. That if we change this goldfish, and we let that goldfish and the process being run by humans like me who have the best intentions most of the time, it still doesn't work. So how can technology help? Can it help? What we're doing at our small firm is looking at language, written language, in CVs, in LinkedIn profiles, in GitHub profiles. People will share them with us and see if we can find the soft part of what people are doing, their motivation, their adaptability. Are they able to change accordingly to new circumstances? And leave more of the hard part of selection processes behind. That's super difficult because clients are really asking us for a fast process. They're fast-growing tech companies. They need instant results. And what we're trying to do is develop a system, software that was based on a BERT model trained by Google. That's where I've got Ernie's friend on stage. And see if we can come up with a better system. Not a system that will replace that whole goldfish process, but it will improve it a bit with the selection process. And I truly believe that technology, that machine learning, artificial intelligence, all the sexy names we call it, maybe it's just data, maybe it's a different way of structuring data, can really help with non-biased search. That non-biased search is not just a cool thing. It's not just on diversity and inclusivity, which we all try to do within our organizations and which we try to sell to our clients and to our family and friends. But it also will result in people staying longer at their jobs, being recruited in a better way, not on their hard skills, but more on their soft skills. This is what I see as a big future, and of course there are combinations to be made, and it wouldn't and it shouldn't change overnight. But still, if we all would try to work more according to those new paradigms, we will look at better systems. We will not look at just replacing a recruitment process with a lot of lists of CVs, and we will say, well, why did that person didn't have a job in between 2018 and 19. We will look for other indicators that will more predict flexibility, adaptability, And that quotient, Marijn talked about wrong indicators before as well. I think that will help us a lot in learning eventually how we can make sure that we attract new talent, that talent drought, but also that the selection process is going to be less biased. And not because it's sexy and cool to select people less biased, but because it will futurely predict if people are staying. And what we've heard before, it's not just the remote working. We've heard from the first speaker as well. Is that the big part? Or the pizza and football systems at the office? It's really about understanding who you're going to bring in the company and if they fit the culture. Not if they fit exactly everybody else who's recruiting you and also did a technical university education somewhere. But that cultural part, that soft skill part is going to be really a future on growth as well, on really expanding not only the Netherlands but a lot of countries and making a difference. For me personally, it's a big challenge. So that's also the reason I was really enjoying the talks this morning, and I would really also try to continue this conversation, because it's not something that we as an organization, that Sylvia and I can build alone together with our colleagues. It's really something of a mindset that we should try to change. So we're also looking for companies in which we can pilot our approach and really see how we can potentially use machine learning, AI, language-based systems to better hire people and to prevent future resignation processes and big droughts. And maybe it's a small step, but why the hell, why don't we try it? So thank you a lot. All right.
Thank you so much, Hayo. Okay, now I think we have Gary Fowler, who is joining us. Thank you. Hi, Gary.
How are you?
Good. I'm very good, and we can hear you. So Gary is the CEO and co-founder of GSD Venture Studios and is going to bring remarks virtually for us today. Over to you, Gary.
Yeah, sure. No, thank you very much. I appreciate it. My name is Gary Fowler. I'm a serial entrepreneur and investor. I've been involved in 17 startups, been involved in tech for 30 years. I've also been involved in several unicorns. I was on the original management team of Put Software, which was sold to Salesforce for $1.35 billion. And most recently, the company Eva.ai, my remote workforce management company, was acquired by Vizier in Canada. We believe that intellectual capacity is evenly spread around the world, but opportunities are not. So with that, when I first started Eva, one of the things we looked at is what we call infobesity. Think about your lives. Think about employees' lives. You have about 300,000 items in your own personal clouds. The entire web in 1996 was 257,000 websites. You have more information in your personal cloud, the entire web. The challenge is that number is doubling every year. In 5 years, you're going to have 10 million items. Think about over the last couple of weeks. How many times has somebody said to you, I sent you a message, did you get it, an email? When did you send it? I sent it a couple of days ago. Where did you send it? Think about all the places you can get that email. Telegram, could be in your Messenger, could be in LinkedIn, could be in different email addresses. We're inundated with information. So when we first started Eva, one of the things we looked like is a Google-like search for your personal cloud. We developed 19 patents in that area. Then we started to look at the employees and some of the other challenges. Think about it. There's about, on the planet Earth today, is 123 zettabytes of data. If you took DVDs or CDs and stacked them one on top of another, it would go 93 times between the Earth and the Moon. Excuse me, 94 times between the Earth and the Moon. That number has grown 68% per year. So now think about it. As an employee, how much data is coming at you? As an employer, how much data is coming at you that we need to look at? So one of the challenges that we had with Findo, we started to move, we created a intelligent assistant. We called it Eva, YBA.ai. But then we started to look at their employees, and I had regionally diverse teams. I had R&D teams that were located in Eastern Europe that we needed to manage all over the world. And so we started to understand that we needed to look at this differently. So we started to apply our artificial intelligence in things like sentiment analysis, things like the Great Resignation. Well, think about it. Over the last 7 years, I remember when I was one of the early Zoom users, and people said to me, "Why would you use that? I've already got Skype." Well, you know, at the beginning of the COVID, McKinsey said that 90% of the companies were going to go through the digital transformation over the next 10 years. Well, we had to do it very quickly. Think about it. A year and a half ago, we were all wearing masks, and we weren't in events like this. So it wasn't that we really wanted to do work remotely. We were forced to work remotely. And at the same time, you know, I had a chance last year to address the United Nations. My speech was technology as a tool for peace. We've got 1.4 billion people in 54 countries in Africa. We've got 764 million people in the European Union, over 300 million in the United States, 667 million people that are located in Latin America. We've got a largest population under 30 in the world in Africa. And today, you know, I have companies, I have 121 companies in my portfolio representing 51 countries from around the world. We need to figure out how to use these workforces in an entirely different way, an entirely different strategy. We need to think about intergenerational teams. We talked about it, I believe it was Rebecca, and correct me if I'm wrong, talked about, you know, the next generation, 4 generations working together. We need to use that talent, that experience that we have, to be able to help us. And I wrote an article in Forbes about intergenerationally, culturally diverse, decentralized teams. It's time that we start to do that. We've seen during this pandemic, and this is, you know, this is not the only pandemic that we're going to have within our lifetime. We got to figure out how to be able to utilize these resources in a much better way. You know, when we went down through with EVA and we started to look at we actually were predicting resignation 6 months before people were even thinking about it. We started to look at things like 360-degree views of employees and how we could make their lives better and accommodate them, how we could help them with those management relationships, how we can help them with customers, how we can help them understand and be able to do the work more efficiently and effectively. You know, we said that we were really an MRI for organizational health. So what I see in the world is I see that, you know, we've got a lot of challenges in front of us. When I spoke at the UN, I talked about, you know, global warming, average temperatures around the world going up 7 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of this century. The population increased from 8.1 billion to 13 billion by the end of this century. And look at all the challenges. You know, I had the pleasure of being involved in one of the early weather forecasting companies, Dr. Irving Frick, who was a student of Einstein at Princeton. I worked with him in the early 90s. We talked about weather going forward. We got to really bind together. One of the challenges that we have is to be able to solve a lot of the complex problems. And by doing remote workforce management, by making people's lives better, by having things like intelligent systems. When I say that, it's kind of like, you know, I look at dealing with this data kind of like your grandmother, right, that loves you unconditionally. In fact, I wrote an article in Forbes about that also. And by that, I mean being able to help us decipher this data, these streams of data that are coming at us, to be able to help us be able to work better, faster, and more effectively. So with that, you know, I just like in closing, you know, so with GSD, you know, I have 121 companies from around the world. There's some of the top AI companies from anywhere from Japan, Nigeria, Zambia, Ghana, Indonesia, Malaysia, Hungary, throughout the European Union. But one of the things I find is that, you know, again, intellectual capacity is evenly spread. Right now, I'm down in Palm Beach in Florida. I live in Palo Alto, California. But this is the, you know, the preview of coming attractions. The key is, how do we deal with this data that's coming at us? How do we take advantage of, in a positive way, of the intellectual capacity that's all around us? And how can we solve a lot of these complex challenges that we have in front of us? I believe that artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning, quantum computing, the metaverse, and Web3 are going to help us solve a lot of those challenges. But it's going to take the initiative. It's not just about the talk. I named my company GSD for a reason. It's Get Shit Done Venture Studios. It's about action. It's about resolve. It's about getting it done. So anyhow, I appreciate you taking your time out of your busy schedules to come today. If you have any questions, you can reach me, Gary@gsdvs.com. I'm happy. I have I've done about 1,000 podcasts and written 200 articles in the last 3 years about these types of topics. Please reach out if you need me. Thanks, Rebecca, and thanks for the entire team. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Good to hear from you. I hope you're going to join us for some questions later on. Before we move to that stage, I'm just going to take a few moments because I really just wanted to reflect on the title for today's session and this focus on reimagining tech talent recruitment and retention within the broader social and economic dynamics of today's world, including the Great Resignation. When I started back in the world of AI and society and its implications, which I suspect is when you all became aware of this narrative and the discourse around this in 2016 and 2017, you'll recall that much of the early attention on AI and its role in the world was this focus on the future of work. You'll remember the robots, they were coming to replace us. It was not going to be friendly, and we all needed universal basic income. It drove a lot of the early narrative around AI and its implications for the world, and frankly, it continues to. But 5 years later, what we've seen is quite different. Indeed, automation in the workplace has increased, but it really hasn't been as much about replacing tech workers and AI jobs as changing the way in which we work and the way in which I would like us all to think about the tech worker today. In their book, Ghost Work, Mary Gray and Sahar Suri shine a light on the many invisible workers, most in precarious jobs outside of the tech hubs, such as Silicon Valley, who spend hours moderating harmful content and labeling data sets to make AI work. So rather than upending our workplaces and their traditional power structures, AI is mostly just amplifying them. So to reimagine these power structures, we need all of the innovative new financing and startups, models of working and research and technology that each of our speakers has shared this morning, but I would contest that we need more. To stay up to speed with technology, we need new forms of collective action to ensure that AI is beneficial for people and the planet. And here I think we as a community can learn from the long-standing international communities who are focused on global health, human rights, and climate action. As stated by Martin Tisney at Luminate and others, complex systems change requires collective action to bring stakeholders together around a common agenda, goals, and measures of success to solve big problems. Partnership on AI, where I'm based, was founded on this fundamental belief. 6 of the large technology companies came together with civil society organizations such as the ACLU and the MacArthur Foundation, and researchers in North America, the EU here, and Asia, to create PAI in 2016. They chose not to set up a trade group or an association, but rather a mission-driven nonprofit. And I think it's because they understood 2 things, which we heard in many of the talks this morning. First, questions emerging about the implications for AI in society are bigger than any one organization can tackle alone. And second, these questions require a socio-technical and multi-stakeholder organization from the start, engaging communities affected by the new technology in the first instance. Today, PAI is one of the largest and most diverse multi-stakeholder organizations dedicated to advancing positive outcomes in AI. And one of our primary areas of focus is on labor and the economy. We call it AI and shared prosperity. Rather than accepting the inevitability of the future of work narrative, we are working, yes, to reimagine it. We believe that AI left alone will exacerbate the polarization of the labor market, and therefore AI must be steered deliberately to be economically inclusive. We're partnering with industry, we inform government policymakers to ensure that AI adoption in workplaces advances an abundance of well-paid, good jobs for workers of all skill profiles and demographics across the globe. We're developing with companies corporate-level commitments to engage workers as co-designers of AI development and deployment. And we're studying things like data enrichment processes, worker perceptions of AI, and attrition in the tech workforce with the goal of creating new open source resources to support those commitments and inform innovations in public policy. I'll give you 3 examples of reports that we have recently released. The first was on responsible sourcing of data enrichment surfaces. This is often outsourced by many tech companies as they think about the labor they need to enrich the labeling, enrich the data and label the data sets that they use. This is a quickly growing population of tech workers who just do not enjoy the same pay, benefits, or recognition or credit as people we usually think about when we think about tech workers. The goal of this research is to address poor working conditions in data labeling and human review services and advance the discourse around the indispensable role that these workers play in AI development. Our recent report in this regard delves into key decision points that every business is making during the data enrichment process to really understand the impact on worker experiences and make recommendations for how companies should approach these choices to improve labor conditions. The second report is one we just released last week on AI and job quality. These are insights from frontline workers, many of them based outside of the global north. So speaking with customer service representatives in India, data annotators in sub-Saharan Africa, and warehouse workers in the US. The major findings from this work are that executive and managerial decisions shape AI's impact on workers. Workers do generally appreciate some aspects of working with AI, and the harms that AI is deploying are not new and they are not novel. So workplace AI often reduces the worker's ability to exercise human skills and talents. So of course, empowering workers early in AI creation and use increases those opportunities to make sure that the implications are beneficial. The third report is called Beyond the Pipeline. This is specifically looking at the high rates of attrition in women and minoritized individuals in AI companies. As the lack of diversity in the pipeline for recruitment has been pretty well studied, this work focused on attrition, particularly of women and individuals from underrepresented groups. We know that surveys show that a disproportionate number of technical employees from these groups report leaving often sooner versus their colleagues due to unfairness, discrimination, or prejudice. So the result is that we know what happens. We have fewer women, we have fewer minoritized folks working on AI, and we know the implications for the quality of the AI we're developing. So this research focused on why do people leave and what can be done about it. First, people said they left for 4 reasons: a toxic work environment, company values being inconsistent with their own, experiences of prejudice, and a need for growth and opportunity elsewhere. It resulted in 4 recommendations. Organizations must systematically support employee resource groups. Participants in the research discussed a wide range of initiatives that varied dramatically, but they uniformly praised well-supported employee resource groups as a crucial part of an inclusive environment. Secondly, organizations must intentionally diversify their leadership and their management teams and promote, particularly when it comes to AI research, interdisciplinary norms because of the diversity of disciplinary perspectives required to do this work. Participants described ways in which management and senior leadership either actively worked to support diversity initiatives or failed to support them. Third, DEI trainings must be specific in order to be effective and less disconnected from the content of the AI work. It's important that that the diversity training be connected directly to the work that the individuals are doing every day. And then finally, and we all know this, organizations must fundamentally realign their values to ensure that they are centering those voices that are often not represented in the very white and male leadership teams that we have in place. If you're interested in any of those reports, I encourage you to visit our website at partnershiponai.org to download these true reports. As we've been discussing today, AI development is all about people. It is a human endeavor, and making sure that our organizations are well positioned to attract and retain the talent and support them is key to our work. So now we're going to have a few questions. I'll put my other hat back on with the panel, and then open up to you. So someone has a microphone? Yes, you do. So if you do have questions, please raise your hand and we'll come to you. So lots of very, very different perspectives that you're all bringing as you think about tech talent and the need to both attract them and to retain them in all of the different ways in which they work. If you had one thing that each of you would recommend to a manager about how to be successful in the tech environment in terms of supporting and retaining employees amidst the complexities, I get them, Marian, in terms of all of the dynamics of what's happening, what would you recommend? Who would like to go first? Yes.
Do we use that thing or this thing? Oh, well, you can hear me. It's actually a question to you. When you grew up, which of you knew what you wanted to be when you grew up? Hands up. Who knew what it wanted to be later in life? How many of you actually became that? That's very few hands. And I think this is the very core issue that we also didn't mention tonight, is that as a kid, you're dumb, you're stupid, you don't know what you want to do. And how are you going to find that out? Not by trying one thing, but by trying 50 different things to figure out what you like, what you're actually good at, very big difference, and where the coffee is fit for human consumption. I work for a consulting company, and I'm sure many of our competitors are in the crowd high. When you're starting your job or when you're climbing the career ladder, you want to try 50 different things, but our rigid promotion structures within companies do not allow for that. You can barely even change department. So what happens? You leave the damn company, and then again, it's not because of you, it's because they could just get something better. But more on that at 4 o'clock.
Okay, so management needs to be able to support individuals trying new and different things.
That's what they want, that's what they don't get.
Great. Others?
And next.
Yeah.
For me, I think the big priority, particularly over the next few years, is actually thinking about the experience of work. But actually for quite a lot of us, particularly if you work in a larger firm, I spend a lot of time, I work for a bank, I work for freelance for a number of other banks since then. In large organizations, it can be surprisingly difficult to actually get stuff done. And the actual experience of, there's a lot of time that is spent, navigating sort of organizational complexity, finding information, getting basic work done. And most of that, particularly when there's this battle for talent, really want to get on with the stuff we enjoy, where our talents lie, rather than having to navigate all of this additional complexity. So actually, all of this has become more complex as we move to these more remote and distributed ways of working, because our ways of working haven't caught up with that. So often, this has become exacerbated. As soon as your tech doesn't work, you're completely unproductive. If I can't log on, I can't get anything done. So actually, we need to fundamentally rethink the processes of how work gets done. Can we find more asynchronous ways of working? Can we work better as distributed teams, rather than simply translating things that we used to do at work to these new ways of working, which isn't working a lot of the time, and is simply just getting in the way. And some of that is from around the software and hardware that we're given, but a lot of that is around process, around having good team structures and so on. So if we want to retain talent, we need to let that talent thrive. And a lot of that for me is about thinking about what's the experience of working here like, and how can we improve that overall so that people can get on with the stuff they'd rather be doing.
Great. Thanks. Want to jump in?
Sure. Is this on? People hear me?
Yeah.
Cool. So I'd really like to highlight autonomy and trust. I think giving workers autonomy is really, really crucial at this point in time to attracting and retaining talent. And that obviously requires a lot of trust in order to let people kind of get on with focusing on output rather than focusing on inputs. I think that there are a lot of more traditional ideas from work that there is a big risk in kind of taking forward in exactly the way that Sharon's just described. So set working hours and the kind of presenteeism of the office, for example. These things really have no place in a remote work environment. And giving people autonomy really allows them to do their job to the best of their ability without so much input from other people about how they should be working. But I think work is incredibly personal and that everybody is very, very different in what makes them most productive or creative.
Thank you. Final? Yep.
Yeah, I think a very difficult to implement, but essentially quick win for the Dutch tech industry is changing language. I mean, I think that at least 50% of our clients are still requesting Dutch-speaking candidates. In this fast-changing world, that sounds rather silly, but it's still the case. So remote work is one, and I think that's totally going to be the future of the growth of the tech industry, especially in Europe. But allowing people from different languages, especially English or Spanish in the future, is also going to really create a bigger pool of talent, as we're currently always recycling the same Dutch people in that tech industry. And it sounds easy, maybe as well from a Canadian-US perspective, but in the Netherlands, we're still not there.
Fascinating. I mean, I think that's creating systems that allow for autonomy and creating systems that allow for a multilingual worker base will really challenge traditional management structures and the way we work. And I can say that as the oldest person on the panel here. Gary, did you want to jump in with any comments with regard to management and what they should be thinking about? We can't hear you. We'll just wait for you to come up.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's great.
Sorry about that. One of the things that a couple of months ago, I had a very interesting gentleman on one of my shows, and he's a four-star admiral, the former #2 guy in the U.S. military. And I asked him a question. I said, what does it take to be an admiral? And he said, and to have people follow you. And he said, compassion and empathy. So I think one of the things, and the Dutch are really good at it, and that is to be able to deal with cultural sensitivities. This world, as we get closer and closer together, and it becomes more democratized, we're going to figure out we're going to have to understand how to live together and how to be able to accept people in entirely different ways. And I think in terms of companies, one of the challenges that we have is how to be able to integrate it together and at the same time, still maintain ourselves. So that challenge is in front of us, and it's happened very, very quickly. Like I said, during the pandemic, what happened over a couple of years wouldn't have happened, over 20, and it had to happen. So we're at a dawn of a new era, and it's really exciting, actually.
Thank you. Okay, I'll ask one more question to the panelists, and then I think, yes, great, coming to you. Okay, so we talk about this area as the future of work. A number of you talked about long-term views and the importance for companies and management to have a really long-term view about thinking about workforce health. So if you had to make one prediction about how the world of work, particularly in the AI sector, is going to change or not over the next 3 to 5 years, what would it be? Anyone want to do some future of work forecasting for us?
I was building these models 8 years ago, and to quote an old teacher of mine, the context differs, but the mechanisms remain the same. And that's basically it. We see an acceleration now of people hustling and moving between jobs because they can't change enough within job. And they waited for 1-2 years for that due to COVID, due to economic fluctuation, which is a big predictor of that. Hamburger prices is another, but that's at 4 o'clock. It's going to go up and down, but it's normal. It's just more than we expected, and as usual, we didn't prepare for it in the long term because we're stuck on our bottom line.
Okay?
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I mean, it's with all new technologies, we overestimate the impact on the short term and we underestimate the impact on the long term. So I do think that's also what we've seen with 3D printing, sort of a new technology a couple of years ago, which existed for 30 years before that. Things will have an exponential curve, but the next decade or so, if human beings are still in charge of this change, it's going to take a while.
Fair enough. Lauren?
I think on the edges, we're going to see a lot more project-based and sporadic work over the next few years on that kind of 5-year horizon. You can see a little of that already. Freelancing has been on the rise for many years. Digital platforms have obviously become prevalent in many areas. But I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the knowledge economy and for tech workers in particular. And again, this kind of relates back to some of the other things I mentioned around flexibility and autonomy. So people really being able to wake up in the morning and decide what it is they want to work on when they log onto their computer. That's my big prediction.
All right. I'd like that, to be able to decide what I want to work on when I wake up. Lauren?
Sharon.
Sharon.
I was actually going to say something pretty similar. That for me, I think one of the biggest trends will make an impact over the next few years is increasing flexibility, moving beyond thinking about location, but actually disconnecting work from jobs. And that could be on a project basis. But also, if we want to access talent, and particularly a more diverse talent pool, we really need to disconnect from the concept of full-time work as well and think about how we might parcel up work more differently so that we can make it more inclusive to a multi-generational workforce, one that might be reskilling multiple times through a career, potentially is managing their career across illness, disability, a longer working life, or caring responsibilities. So perhaps the biggest challenge is once we embrace these other changes in the future of work, we can embrace flexibility in more forms, and that will enable us to include more people in our workforce.
Thank you, Sharon. Gary, you want to jump in?
Yes, sure. So we're going to see the evolution of incredible tools, things like AR, VR, XR tools to make the experience, remote work experience more real. We're going to see conversational, human-like chatbots like Runday that allow you to be able to have human-like conversations, and we're going to then have an interface back to those remote workers. So we're going to start to see incredible hybrid changes take place, and we're going to see it become much more efficient, in my opinion, and effective.
Fabulous. Thank you. Okay, over to you. I saw a hand up in the back. Oh, you got the microphone. Okay. We'll come to you next.
Okay. So, yeah, we want autonomy. I think Lauren is completely correct on that. If our boss is a jackass, we will quit. But maybe for you, Sharon, or for you, Marcus, you work for a consulting company, a French consulting company, a publicly traded French consulting company. You've worked for banks, I've worked for banks. That's the thing you all do not address. You come with solutions. Like, this is what needs to be changed, this is what needs to be different. How do you make a dent in these organizations? Mark, what do they say at Capgemini? I work with Capgemini people. What do they say there if you say, hey, come on, we need to do better?
Do you want me to put it up, or do you want to go first?
You raise your hand first.
I'm a banker, consultant.
Okay.
How do you make a dent in these grey, annoying...
The reality for me is we're not going to change any of this until we change management. And a phrase I used recently is a lot of managers, a lot of the changes we've seen, particularly over COVID, create loads of opportunities to work and radically rethink the way that we work. But too many managers are like toddlers or dolphins, have not developed the concept of object permanence, so they forget that things that they can't see still exist. And they continue to reward the people who are in front of their face. And until we can change that, we're not really going to be able to build that. We need to ensure that people are trusted, and this is a massive problem in banks and in large and complex organisations, that they still reward proximity and showing up. And until we can make that change, we're never going to overcome some of these other challenges, in my view.
In 2020, we still saw a lot of organizations shift their entire model because they switched to working from home, something they talked about for almost a decade. Why did it happen in 2020? Because they wanted to? Please. Because they had to. Individual people can change. I do believe that. I am a social scientist. But it is statistically unlikely. So what is the likelihood of large groups of people changing? Statistically, a whole lot less likely. And it is my belief that Capgemini is a consulting company Like all the other ones, I'm sorry, the coffee isn't all that good. I'm going to be honest with you. Banking sector has better coffee. Police work has the worst coffee of all, but the most fun work, because you get to predict how many people get stabbed, and I enjoy that more than more cases. But that's me. So basically, the worse the coffee, the more fun the job. The point here is, large organizations only change when they have to. And that mechanism, the data might differ, the situation might differ because the Pokemon badge or the label is different, but the mechanism and the model is the same. This is how organizations work. Mine just happens to be French.
Anyone else want to jump in on that one? No? Okay. Next question.
The models we have, or these models you have, rely on a lot of data that we do not necessarily have on the employees, on the workers. We rely today a lot more on the managers to understand, get to know the individuals. We have trends, but we also have individuals. If we go more to remote, we're losing a lot of the opportunity for the managers to know their people and to understand the individuality. We talked about remote working as a trend, but we've been hiring a lot of Gen Z workers. They're the ones to go to the office every day while they don't have to, who ask for a lot of presence, they want to work in team, have face-to-face time. So how do we deal with that? The distance from the manager, and how do you get to know the individuals and to fine-tune solutions for them to be happy in the place if you don't have the manager and if you don't have the data?
I'd love to jump in on this one if that's okay. So I'm part of an all-remote company, and we are more than 200 people from more than 70 countries. Many time zones covered, many of us are digital nomads, and we have a very, very strong work culture. I think a common misunderstanding about remote work is that it's literally everybody just sitting in front of their computers all of the time. But well-designed all-remote companies actually put a lot of emphasis on the building of relationships with colleagues and of having in-person time. So a couple of examples from our policies. We meet for team retreats, like all of the kind of key people in the company, the kind of core team, meet for retreats at least twice a year. So it's everybody getting together in person in a different place. And that is intensive in-person time. We also have budgets available to every team member that allow them to travel and work in person with smaller groups of colleagues, or even just one-on-one because there's somebody whose input they need on something. So remote is not everybody just sitting in front of a laptop and never seeing one another, but it does take well-designed sort of business practices in order to really get the best of both worlds, to, I suppose, do hybrid, although it really feels like that word has been co-opted over the last couple of years to not quite represent what I'm trying to represent here. But thinking really creatively, I think, is really important. And I also just want to say that managers and business leaders have to make these decisions about how things operate, but actually individual employees can have a huge impact by just bringing new ideas to the table and actually contributing to their company culture. Culture should not be something that is done to you, it should be something that is like a value exchange.
Can I also chip in on that one? So while all remote companies are starting to reinvent this, none of this is particularly new. If you work for a large global company like a big bank, like Capgemini, a lot of your relationships will be remote and have been for many years. So when I worked for a big Asian bank, half of my team was in Singapore. I probably saw them twice a year at most. Those in-person moments are hugely valuable in helping to build that trust. But you need to trade off it for the rest of the time. So it is completely possible to more intentionally design that and build in time for relationship building. But it is something we're going to have to do a lot more of as we spend less time in person. But again, none of this is particularly new. It's something that global companies have been grappling with for decades. And we'll probably have to rethink in the coming years as business travel becomes more complex and more difficult.
Great point. Okay. One last question? Yes.
Yes. It's working?
Yes.
All right. I'd like to know what the panel thinks might be the skill sets that people in the C-suite positions, those in upper management in large manufacturing or healthcare, where they're now blending the human workforce with the mechanized workforce, AI. They need to switch, perhaps, their way of dealing with the employees. What skill sets would you advise they should adopt in order to be successful in their positions?
Great question. Skill sets. would like to jump in.
And you said adapt. I think that adaptability, that is so hugely important for people. And I think a lot of the C-level, talking from a Dutch perspective, especially at large hospitals, at large firms, are not that adaptable. They've been trained to do something really good. They've been trained as a manager. They will continue doing so until their pension. But really being able to change in a fast-changing environment with exponential technologies left or right is very difficult. So hiring people with more of an adaptability quotient in that sector is hugely important and not easy.
Mm-hmm. Great.
If you look at the pyramid of most organizations, you'll see at the bottom level, everyone was pretty okay based on data with working from home. It was actually the managers complaining about working from home, because it was not about the work changing, but managing the work changing, and you don't know if they're doing their job. Now, I do believe, based on data we have, that productivity was kept up even though people started working from home, but culture, organizational culture died real fast when large classical organizations started working from home. So they objected more, but who is objecting the most? That's the oldest generation. That's in many traditional Dutch companies, that's the C-suite. Where back in the day, many would work from the ground up, started below, so they know the work down there. But I think that's the most important thing. That connection is gone nowadays, because now organizations are led by people who studied management but don't know the actual work. And this becomes even more challenging when you run a technology company, when you focus on data, when you focus on AI, and you have no clue what your people are actually doing. That is the great challenge.
Great. Any other comments?
Yeah, I could
Yeah,
say
jump in,
something.
Gary.
You
Yeah.
know, the C-suite, you know, part of the challenges is C-suite needs to become more technologically adept, and they need to understand that there's some incredible technologies that can help their business and optimize their business. They need to be familiar with the web, metaverse and the Web3, AR, VR, XR, and need to be familiar with these technologies that can add these efficiencies. And I'm not sure they are. Remember, the Harvard MBA was started to teach managers how to manage, not how to take risk. So one of the challenges that we have, which was the first MBA, the challenge they have is to be able to stay abreast of the changes that are out there and to utilize those changes, from startups that are out there that have technologies that can impact their business to existing companies that could help them to be able to maintain a competitive edge. So open their eyes, you know, open their ears and go out there and look for those technologies to help the business. They either innovate or die.
I think that's a great place to end. I mean, that's certainly what we've heard across the panel this morning, right? Is that it's all about innovation, adaptability, capacity to understand, challenge our own biases, challenge our own previous ways of working as we think about how we tackle this work moving forward. Thank you all for joining us today. Please join me in thanking the panel. I'm going to let you know that if you can't hear it, lunch is back in the exhibition area of the black and white box rooms. I think that is right next door. After lunch, the tracks will continue in all of the various rooms. This room will be continuing with the Talent Lab, the future of work, recruitment, and human potential. Please come back and join us. You can, of course, swap between tracks if you would like to do so. Enjoy your lunch, and see you back here in an hour. Thank you.